everyone, and welcome to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris K. Last episode, we did Accept's Greatest Hits, and so we decided to stick around the same territory and bring you a head-to-head featuring one of Germany's first thrash bands. Today, we're bringing you Kreator Coma of Souls versus Violent Revolution.
Released in 1990, Coma of Souls is Kreator's fifth album and marked the end of their initial thrash period. A decade's worth of experimentation saw them release 4 albums that seemed more like an attempt to conform to what was happening in the metal scene rather than kind of continuing on their path. Finally, 11 years later, the new millennium saw the band return to what they know best and re-embrace their extreme metal roots with 2001's Violent Revolution.
So today, we put 2 of their heaviest albums head-to-head and see which one comes out on top, Coma of Souls or Violent Revolution. All right, so before we begin the episode, I want to address something that happened on New Year's Eve, actually, and it's kind of related to this topic. I received an email from one of our listeners who listens to us in Germany, and so it was really, really cool to get an email from someone that, we get emails from time to time, and we don't... we get a lot of suggestions here and there, but this was different. This was a guy who really, really loved the podcast. And so I want to read a little bit of it so that everyone can understand what I'm talking about. And so this guy's name is Christoph. I'm not going to mention his last name, but he wrote, "Hello, the Dean and Chris. I banged into your podcast around last May. The keyword was debating. Also, me simply can't stop talking about metal. It has become straightway my favorite music podcast, and I have enjoyed many of your episodes. Unfortunately, my wife does not like music that much, particularly not metal. Hence, I have not enough opportunity to listen to all your fantastic lists. I love your pick and drop algorithm. Your expertise is tremendous, and you're great after decades still ongoing. Passion for metal and other music is felt every single minute. Your podcast has been accompanying my post-COVID-19 lockdown cakewalks, and I enjoy your thoughts very much. Your appreciative conversation and your well-formulated pointed statements. Actually, I first thought you must be Englishmen. I am looking forward to each of your shows." So then he goes on to talk about some bands that he would think that we should talk about and some genres and all that stuff. And I thought I just saw this really long email and I was like flabbergasted that, we reached somebody out in Germany. And he had some really good points about bands that we want to talk about. And this is all stuff that, like when we talked on last week's episode with Accept, our New Year's resolution is to expand our horizons. And it's not something that we need to learn new music or to learn about certain stuff, although I did that this week with this show. It's just about adding more content and having better discussions on the show. So, Chris, you just listened to me talk about this email and you read some of it. Is this not like one of the coolest things that you can receive when you're looking at your phone and checking email?
I mean, it's really nice to get that kind of feedback, and also the suggestions. Most of the time we want to know what you guys want to hear. So it's part of it is we're having fun talking about the subjects that we love, but also sometimes we have really learned to like even more than what we thought we liked through, pushing each other's limits. So sometimes getting some feedback from you guys is also really cool in that we've gotten suggestions of things to do that kind of pushed our horizons as well. So I think it's really great. We'll definitely be sending kind of an email response and discussing some of this stuff too. But yeah, there's some great suggestions and looking forward to talking about some of this stuff too.
Yes, and Christoph, once you hear this episode, so it's going to post obviously a different day than we actually record it. So once Christoph actually hears this, he will have listened already to one Accept episode, which is part of the reason why we did that. It was because we recorded it after New Year's, and I had basically read the email, said, "Oh, we need to do something here in Germany, type of idea." And so then that brought me to suggesting to you that we do this Kreator episode, which we had already talked about before.
We've talked about for a long time, because right. Kreator is a I would say top 10, maybe probably top 15 band for me.
Oh, okay, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, and he's got some great ideas on here on this email. So, and I don't want to talk about the ideas because we're gonna definitely do some of these ideas, but I can't wait to get to it all. But Christoph, thank you for listening. We really, really appreciate it. We're glad that we have people like you out there listening to us. I know we have a couple of friends out in the Detroit area that constantly email or actually send us messages. I'm the one who reads them the most. But that's Darius and Mark that listen out somewhere. They're in the outskirts of Detroit. So, thank you guys for listening on a regular basis. So, and everyone else who listens, hey, send emails, send us messages. We talk about it at the end of every episode. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, or you can send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. So go for it, man. Do what you want to do and give us some ideas. Chris, we are here to talk about Kreator.
That we are. So it's about time.
It is about time. So I, for one, have never got into Kreator. So that's a weird thing, being a metalhead for as long as I've been, but I just never. I saw the album covers. I saw the advertisements in magazines for some of their older albums. I thought that the artwork was cool. The one piece of art that sits with me for such a long time is the album cover to Coma of Souls. So it's one of those things where I just never got into the band. And obviously there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't think there was something I didn't like the band. It's just I didn't get into them. When did you get into Kreator?
So oddly enough, I got into them around the mid 90s, 96, 97, kind of around the same time that I was first getting into Children of Bodom. However, the only things that I could find from them were the older albums. I've mentioned a couple times I used to go to a record store here in Houston called Diamond Head Records. Actually, technically in Spring. It's no longer around anymore. But that's where I found a lot of the stuff that I got into. Was they had imports and releases, metal releases. It was primarily a metal store. They had other sections, but it was aisles and aisles of metal. And so I had picked up, kind of starting in the early years of Kreator, and only towards the end did I find out about some of the other stuff like Endorama and what was it, Outcast. I don't remember those albums as well because I don't like them very much. Cause for Conflict was one of them. That was the one I kind of did like out of those 4 experimental albums. But I really started from the beginning, even though I got into them around the time that they were putting out some of the stuff I don't enjoy. So when Violent Revolution came out in the early 2000s, in 2001 specifically, I was thrilled. I didn't really live through the whole era. I mean, obviously I was alive, but I didn't listen to them throughout the entire time that they were kind of in that experimentation phase, because I really picked up more of the old stuff. So I became an instant fan. I always really liked them, but some of the stuff that's come in the later years when they went back to their roots has been some of my favorite stuff from the band. So I have never seen them live. It's still something I really want to do, and I'm going to make sure that happens at some point. It's funny because there's certain bands like I've never listened to that I've probably seen live several times.
I'm not a big fan, and I know that a lot of people are going to probably curse me out for saying this, but I'm not a big fan of Exodus. And
screw you, man.
and there's a lot of reasons why, but the but bottom, I mean, there's certain songs that I do like. Like I got into Toxic Waltz. I like Piranha. Some of the newer stuff, there's a couple of songs that I like in there, but I just never. They were never one that I said, "Oh, I gotta put them in and listen to them." It just was never that way. And the funny thing about like going back and listening to early Kreator is that I got a vibe from them talking the first few albums, the EP Flag of Hate and the first album and all that stuff. There's a lot of Exodus vibes, a lot of Slayer vibes to me, things like that. And it's funny because you and I were talking about it. Yeah, they started at the same time in different parts of the world. Okay, Exodus had already existed. They were not they didn't have a record contract, but they existed, and they were friends. They were friends with Metallica. They were friends with Slayer, and so it was one of those things where they were all influential to each other, and obviously with tape trading as being a big thing back then in those days, I'm pretty sure Kreator knew who some of these bands were that were coming out of the San Francisco area and California in general. So,
all these bands knew each other in some respect, like whether they knew each other in person or they just heard each other, or stuff like that. Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting that they kind of started at the same time. They have a similar sound, and there's a lot of, to me, similarities in the riffing, in the melodic structure of the songs, and things like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this because we have a lot to cover here. So we're talking about Coma of Souls. So Kreator in 1990, when Coma of Souls was released, consisted of, how do you say his first name? Is it Millie or Mile?
Millie.
Millie, okay. So Kreator in 1990, at the time of the release of Coma of Souls, featured, their leader, Millie Petroza, on vocals and rhythm guitars, Frankie Blackfire, I want to say it's Godstic on lead guitars, Rob Fioretti on bass, and Ventor on drums. So
we apologize, Christoph, for the pronunciation,
for the brutalization of these German names. Actually, Milles is not even German; it's Italian. Yes. So, but Coma of Souls was released on November 6, 1990, on Epic Records worldwide and Noise Records in Germany. It was produced by Randy Burns, who is famous for all the Florida death metal, and it was recorded at El Dorado Recording Studios and Image Studios in Hollywood, California. All the songs were music was written by Kreator, the band, and all the lyrics by Petroza. So, cool little tidbit on this album. 1990, the worldwide sales of vinyl was going down dramatically. This album was released on a limited edition purple vinyl for a little bit. Okay. So Chris, since you are more familiar with Kreator, why don't you go ahead and let's talk about these songs.
All right. So like I said earlier, or I guess maybe you said in the intro, this was kind of the last of the thrash albums before they kind of went into some experimentation. This was an album that a lot of people view as either their pinnacle, depending on when you kind of view like some people think that Metallica's first 4 albums are the only ones that matter. Some people think 1 through 5. Some people think 1 and 2, or maybe even just the first album before they sold out, whatever, So there's always those eras of a band, right? So with Kreator, though, I think most people would consider the first EP, the first album, to Coma of Souls being their first era. So this is the end of their first era. Now, the album is very moody, has a very kind of dark feel to it, even more so than some of the stuff that came before, which I would say is more aggressive. So this kind of took it into a new direction even before they started doing a bunch of experimentation. The album starts with When the Sun Burns Red. Again, this is a very dark and moody track. And then it kind of blasts into full gear with heavy thrash drumming. And there's some subtle alternating patterns on the guitar harmonies, which I really like. If you listen very carefully, just kind of listen to how it goes back and forth. It sounds like it's the same riff repeating. However, there is a harmony that takes a different direction with every other stanza, which is really cool. I love the solo, and then the harmony that follows afterwards. There's some effects that are like fire, kind of representing solar flares, and the sun becoming a red giant, ending life as we know it. So, if you know anything about astronomy and the functionality of stars, they have the potential to become what's called a red giant when they're about to burn out, and this is kind of about that subject, very apocalyptic.
Well, that's a lot to say about that song, but it's cool. I picked up on a lot of things that you were saying. I remember listening to the song and I was like, yeah, so it's got that quiet acoustic intro, and then it has a acoustic / clean guitar type of intro, and then like you said, the thrashing starts in. I did notice the harmony solos and the work that's done there. That's pretty cool. I like how it goes from a gallop to this harmony solos. It's pretty neat. And then the last couple minutes of the song, it's got that gallop chug thing going on. And I think that's pretty cool. This song, for one of the first songs for me to really pay attention to when it came to Kreator, it didn't surprise me, but it didn't not surprise me, I guess you could say. There were some things about it I'm like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. I didn't think that was going to be there. And then the rest of it was kind of like, oh yeah, this is what I'm expecting. So, but I thought the song was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good start to the album. So track 2 is the title track, Coma of Souls. I would say this is a bit more of a straightforward thrash track. With more emphasis on the lyrics, kind of discussing the savagery of war and masters of war, like the people behind it. You think of, when you think of war, so a lot of times you just think of the people that are battling, but you don't necessarily always think about the people that are responsible for it, that are kind of sitting behind and not having to actually deal with the dire consequences of what's out there in the battlefield. So one thing I really like is the solo is kind of broken into 3 stages here. There's the finger tapping build that starts it, then there's a really chaotic section, and then there's a more pronounced melodic part. And it's very jarring how it kind of switches between the 3, but I think there's a reason for that in how the song's presented and the subject matter that's in it. So I always think that's one thing that's very interesting about Kreator's solos, is how they kind of reflect the subject matter of the song and not necessarily always just the tone of the song.
So what I picked up on this song, and it's kind of weird because you're kind of touching on it, but you're not really saying it, is that this song has a vibe to it that is very, like, this is going to be an epic song. It has like beginning, middle, end, kind of has structures to it. And it's weird because the song is not long enough to be considered an epic, but it has that feel to it. Because the intro is not necessarily a quick, short intro. The intro is extended, but it doesn't go deep into the song because it's not a long song. It's really odd. Like, you feel like it's longer than it actually is.
Yeah, but not in a bad way. I get what
you're saying. No, not in a bad way at all. It's got some really cool riffs. I like the main riff. The song itself, the riffing and the structure of the song is really cool. But it's just really interesting how it for me, it gave off that vibe. Like, this is going to be an epic, and it really isn't. But yet, when you break it down, you can actually turn it into an epic if you wanted to. So it's a very interesting song. I think the song is a good song.
I think part of that is the subject matter, and it feels grandiose to some degree.
Right, exactly.
And that's why. So track 3 is People of the Lie. Now, what's interesting here is I always felt like this song could be played by Testament. Like, it has Testament like lyrics, the pace of it, like the riffing sounds like a Testament song. And I just thought that was always kind of interesting. So the pace is a little bit slower than what we've heard for the first 2 tracks. There are some, more harmonies, I would say, than what kind of preceded. The solo, this is one of my least favorite solos on the album, and it's not because it's not good. It just feels like auditorily thin. And maybe that's just the way it was produced. It just doesn't sound as good as what it should, because the solo itself is really nice. It just, for some reason, is a little off-putting when listening to it in the context of the way the rest of the stuff is recorded. But the double bass is really nice and keeps the pace strong. So this is one track that I think definitely sounds better on the remaster, but it's still, I don't think they fully gave it the warmth maybe that it should have.
Okay, I mean, I could see that to some degree, because I'm big on the way songs sound. This track definitely has a really cool riff to it.
Yes,
it's a nice chug. If you want, that's the way I like to look at it. Dare I say this song is catchy? Mm-hmm. It has, it's almost accessible, that kind of vibe to it, especially at this point in time for their career. I mean, it was almost one of those songs that could potentially cross over into a different metal crowd, but they would change from here on forward for a few years, and so that kind of tossed that out the window.
Yes, it definitely. But yeah, I get that kind of catchiness to it, and I think maybe that's what I'm associating with Testament.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so track 4 is World Beyond. What I really like here is, just beyond the ripping pace, is the guitar work, like the way that Millie and Frank play off of each other. I think that's one thing that really works. And what I mean specifically is there are these moments which I would call like the connective tissues between the riffs, those transitions. And there's these really interesting transitions with some guitar work that's kind of unexpected, because the riffs are often kind of straightforward, but the transitions are where that intricacy kind of plays in on this particular track.
This song, I mean, it's a short song, so we'll get that. It's a very punky kind of song.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very fast riff. I like this song, and what this track gives me is that Slayer Exodus vibe. It may not give that to everybody, but that's what it gave to me. So there's something about it that it's like an early Slayer, early Exodus. It's before Rain and Blood. Bonded by Blood type of situation for Exodus. So it's that early extreme speed thrash metal that came out in the early 80s. That's the vibe I get from this song. And for what it is, it's it's a quick little ditty. And it's a
quick little ditty.
But it's a cool song. I mean, I give it, it's short, so it's not a lot to talk about when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these tracks at this point are kind of about, the darkness of humanity, the places that you don't think about, like in your average everyday life, right? The places that your mind go, the places that are you want to avoid, because when you have those dark thoughts, you don't want to let them kind of get inside. And that's what a lot of these songs are about so far, which I really think is a cool subject. Terror Zone, track 5. So this is kind of where you hear some Iron Maiden influence with the opening. I really like that. They never shy away from kind of playing around with some of their inspirations, which I think is really cool. The drum beat following that, though, reminds me a lot of Injustice for All. There's some definite like playing with the influences, like I said here in this track, which is interesting. I think especially just coming a couple years after Injustice for All. I don't know if that was intentional whatsoever, but I think kind of it was. It's another stellar solo, yet I wish there was more of it. It's really brief, which is, I think, unfortunate, but the main riff, honestly, is one of my favorites on the album.
So this track, for me, is the opposite of World Beyond. So this is the opposite of the song that was before it. And this is long. This is made up of several parts, very similar to Injustice for All, which is long and made up of several parts. Mm-hmm. The way I see it is that this song takes you on a journey, Kreator style. So I like that about it. At the same time, it's one of those where, like you said, it has that vibe of Metallica. And what was the other vibe you got off? Iron Maiden. So yeah, because of the fact that it's long and epic and made up of several different parts, it's kind of that little proggy element that Iron Maiden has that Metallica can do from time to time. And so this definitely is showing its influences on that. Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty cool track.
So track 6 is Agents of Brutality. It starts off a bit slower and sludgier, but then kind of takes off into that familiar ripping, almost Flight of the Bumblebee-esque kind of pace. Like there's a riff that has that like speed to it that really reminds me of that, with some classical elements and parts which I really like. So if you just kind of sit there and listen to it, the way that we used to listen to records with, you have your headphones on and the music, and that's it. You can really catch some very interesting kind of classical moments in there, which is cool. The bluesier solo on this track really is one of my favorites on the album, feeling a bit more like something that Andy LaRocque would have put out, like some of the stuff that he did in Merciful Fate, but even more specifically the stuff that he did when he was with Death. I love this solo.
No, I agree. It's a very cool solo. What this does for me is the beginning part of this track gives me a Slayer vibe, almost aggressive perfector to some degree. And this is when I get these vibes, and when I talk about this stuff, that it reminds me of this. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm thinking, oh, this is the same exact riff. Okay, it's something. Maybe there's a 2 or 3 note progression or 2 or 3 strums on the riff progression that just says, oh, I remember hearing something like that a long time ago. So that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying, oh, they did that same exact thing. No, because some people that they might think that. Oh no, doesn't sound anything like that. There's just something that hints at it, reminds me of it. 2 or 3 notes, maybe, per riff or whatever. That's what I get out of that. But the second third of the song moves away from that vibe to me, and it just goes kind of into like a straightforward metal kind of attitude, and it's something I like about that. It's just the way it changes in the song, and that's something that, again, with this album, I've realized that there is this hint of progressiveness that they have with their songwriting.
So one thing I think that it reflects really well, like I said, where the solo will often reflect the lyrical content of the song, or just different aspects, like how sometimes the song feels like it's in sections. Those go really hand in hand with the way that the lyrics are addressed. This is about trained killers of any type, assassins, gladiators, even like just anybody that their entire existence is built around killing. and so it works on many levels because when you're listening to the lyrics, you're understanding, this is a different mindset of a human than what your average person is, and whether they're aggressive beasts or strategic killers or whatever, that it's a dark side of humanity. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, very interesting.
So track 7 is Material World Paranoia. So this track, to me, when I first hear it, always sounds like an opening track, and I feel like it was potentially written as one, but didn't make it as the opening. And in many ways, to me, it harkens back to kind of the sound of like earlier albums. It's not written as kind of the same styling as some of the other stuff on the album, although obviously it is recorded that way. It feels like it fits in. But just thinking about like their whole career, I feel like this could have fit in on some of the earlier albums as well. Again, we're kind of seeing into the dark side of man, willing to submit into corporations, indoctrination into society as pawns, subjects that we think about and deal with every day to day.
You're right. In that regards, it's just, how often do I spend time thinking about, corporations in that regards? It's
You're maybe too busy when taking care of kids and making dinners and stuff like that. But, a lot of people need to touch grass, as they say, and get off, not be perpetually online. But,
Right. No, I get it. What I like about this track is, you got that intro segment for like the first 47 seconds. It's really cool. It gives me a Testament Megadeth vibe to it. Then the speed riff comes in, and that's where things change up a little bit. I like that. The verse melody is different than most of the other songs, and that's good. It's the chorus is slower. It's also different. You get a change of pace at 3 minutes right before the solo, and then there's these weird vocal effects that, like, I thought it was kind of pointless. I mean, it's already a 1990 album. It's already produced, by Randy Burns, which, he has his style of doing things. And it just seems kind of odd to just throw that in there.
Hey, it was cool back then.
That's the thing. It kind of dates the song. But at the same time, this is a really good song. I like this song a lot. I think this is one of these songs that, I could listen to on a regular basis and say, oh yeah, this is a pretty cool track. So, to the point where I actually put it on my Spotify playlist, the one that has 3,000 songs in it that I'll never get through. But yeah, I thought this was pretty cool.
You never know, if you play it now, you might finish it in a few years. So, all right. So that takes us into track 8, Twisted Urges. So I love this intro guitar harmony. It's really cool. It has such a dissonant and kind of chaotic feel that leaves you on edge, kind of with a sense of unease. After about a minute, it transforms into a gallop for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds or so, before this just really chaotic solo, and then kind of returning to that feel from the beginning. So it's a really kind of dark, uncomfortable track. And I mean, the title alone, Twisted Urges, it's that inner turmoil, that darkness. And I think the song, like the way it's written, perfectly reflects the subject matter.
What's funny, what I've noticed about the songs that, listening to them, time and again for the last, month or so, is exactly that. Like the titles reflect the kind of, like, it's like they had a title and said, okay, how can we make the music match the title? And that's not normally the case, but in this one, it really kind of blends that way. A lot of the stuff that they do is like that. And now that you mentioned it, and I started thinking about the stuff that's on Violent Revolution that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, it all is like that.
Yeah, it really listen to every album, and you get that vibe. Like the lyrics match the instrumentation like so perfectly. It's so bizarre. I don't hear that from a lot of bands where there's sometimes the lyrics are like they're happy and the music is dark and you go like there's that juxtaposition, but like he really matches his lyrical content to the music so well.
Yeah, he does. So, Twisted Urge is for me very similar to what you said. It has a certain way at the beginning. It's a thrash song for me, for the most part, up until about a minute, and then it turns into a chugger for like a half a minute, and then it goes back to what it did for the first minute. So I think it's a pretty cool track in and of itself, but it is kind of twisted in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for that reason, it's a track that I would listen to in the context of the album, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to specifically listen to it. But when it's one of these albums for me that I can listen to from front to back, I think it fits really well in there.
I agree.
So track 9 is Hidden Dictator. So this has another kind of has another kind of slight Iron Maiden rub to the bass intro. So like you can tell like they're kind of exercising that influence, but with more of like a lightning paced gallop throughout the song. So it does have the Iron Maiden gallop, but it's like the horse is on steroids. So we see more of the lyrics about our lack of control and the forces that kind of guide us and control us behind the scenes. Like you don't realize how much of your life sometimes is influenced by forces out of your control. And so the song has this slower, kind of more methodic solo echoing that sentiment of the lyrics. It's very cool.
I like the way the bass lick starts off the song, and then it leads into a different type of riff, which then leads into your typical thrash riff. It's a really cool intro to the song.
We're stumbling all around our words today.
The vocal melody and the verse riff are slower and chunky, which is also cool. The drum pattern changes this thing up a little bit on this one. It's very interesting to me. The solo comes in really early at a minute and a half around there. So that's different than your typical song as well. And right around the 2:32 mark, the song slows down for about 50 seconds or so. It's the typical type of progressiveness of thrash that this works with. Thrash, for a lot of people, thrash is defined by not just the way songs are played per se, guitar wise, but the drumming is what makes a lot of songs thrash. Because if you put in, let's say, a melodic death metal drummer that plays a million miles an hour and double bass all the time, it changes the way the song the thrash song changes. It doesn't necessarily become a thrash song. It's not a thrash song anymore. So there's a certain way to play drums. Testament did it really early on and Exodus does it really well. Slayer played their brand of thrash, but it was more of a speed metal type of thing. The drumming was never really a thrash drumming. Lars played a little bit of thrash drumming early on, but got away from that real quickly. So stuff like that, and then who was it? Death Angel, very, very typical thrash sound. So this one has that, and a lot of these songs in thrash are progressive. They change rhythms, they change speeds, they change tempos and all that stuff. So it's one thing that people realize. They just look at this music and they say, oh no, that's just bullshit, it's just thrash, it's they call it trash, but it's complex fucking music. It's not the simplest shit to play, and there is a diversity or a dexterity that's needed to play this kind of music. Yeah. I'm sorry if you think that these people are just a bunch of idiots playing instruments. They're not. Most of them are better than your average freaking musician. So that being said, this track, there's a lot of that progressive style of thrash it's in it, and I think it's a pretty cool track.
Agreed.
A lot of bullshit to say about one song.
Well, I think our audience is the specific audience that would agree with that sentiment, though. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So Mental Slavery is track 10. Extremely relevant today, again, as we are manipulated by the media, made to hate each other. You know, it's one of those things that it comes up constantly. You know, the insidiousness of the government and the media and with how they control us. And it's a subject that's never kind of been dropped. I mean, countless stories have been told about this same subject, right? So the riff reflects that. It's slower, sludgier, darker, really kind of bringing out that, like I said, insidiousness. Really cool track. I think a really great closer for the album.
So for being a very speedy, thrashy album, this song just flips it on its head in that regards. It is much slower, and it's not a slow song per se. It's a metal song, but it's much slower than what you get most of the album. The main riff is really cool to me. It's got some licks at the end of each of the riffs that kind of when you know before it goes into the verse. So that's a pretty cool touch to the songs. It's a chuggy mid-pace thrasher. This song gives me a Sepultura vibe, like an early Sepultura.
Yeah,
maybe
I can see that.
You know, yeah. It's kind of got a catchy chorus. So, you know, and then the riff changes right about the 2.5 minute mark, gets a little chuggier, a little heavier before it goes into the solo. So this is a pretty cool way to end the album. You literally flipped everything on its head. You went from being speed, a little bit of slowness here and there, you know, back to speed. And then you literally have a very relatively consistent song at the end of the album. It's almost kind of like, all right, you know what? We brought you through this really fast paced journey, and now we're just going to slow it down and kind of go into cruise control as we get, you know, to the end of the album. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's, you know, you mentioned the catchiness on certain tracks and stuff like that. And I think early on in Kreator's career, they didn't really focus on that whatsoever. I think it's something that developed over time. They started having choruses that you could kind of sing along to, especially in their later career. But yeah, I never really thought much about that because I've always kind of liked storytelling music. But it is something I notice more now since we've been doing this podcast. So that is an interesting point for sure.
So for me, you know, I when I listen to songs and albums and stuff like that, I listen to I'll listen to it once or twice. Especially if I'm studying it, I'll listen to it a second time just to kind of get where the production is with this. Mm-hmm. So I know that this is Randy Burns. He was, like I said, you know, big death metal producer out of Florida. He actually did a mix of Peace Sells But Who's Buying for the special which we call anniversary edition for Megadeth. He has a distinct style to him, but back then, you know, we're talking 1990. There was definitely a way that he recorded and produced tracks. But the overall sound was always good on those albums, but it was good for what it was at the time. So this album was recorded very well. The mix is good, although there's a little bit of lack on the bottom end over this, which is typical of that time period for this kind of music. And some of the effects that is used, you know, it dates it to an early 80s, a late 80s, early 90s kind of album. Not a big deal in any way, shape, or form because I don't care about that. I just want to. Does it sound good in general? Yes. Okay. Oddly enough, you can actually tell when some of the song where some songs were done. Like they recorded these in two different studios, and you could tell that the drum sound changes. So the drums were recorded at two different places, which they recorded. So we don't know if they did all the tracks in one place and then went to another studio for guitar work or something like that. I don't know the truth behind it all, but to me, it sounds like there's different songs were recorded in different places. So let's say 5 songs in one place and 5 songs in another, or 6 songs, whatever it is, and so the drums have different sounds from song to song. Some obviously are the same as others, while some are completely different. Some are flat-ish, some are more in your face. So anyway, I like the progressive elements on this album. I like the time changes, the riff changes. So, this is a classic metal or classic thrash metal album. And it's a pretty good album. I like it.
I would agree with those sentiments. I mean, especially there is that inconsistency in some of the recording, like I mentioned. That there were moments where like I said, the solo being off a little bit, not quite sounding like it fit in where it should. Or not, I don't mean like it was misplaced or something, but I mean it sounds off in the recording style compared to everything else in the song. And so there is that somewhat like inconsistency in the production, but it's not a big deal. And the complaints about the album are very minor. Like they're not something that's ever going to prevent you from enjoying the album. It's just, nitpicking because that's what we do, so.
No, exactly.
So yeah, a great album. Then we go through, 4 years of, not 4 years, but 4 albums. So from, 92, they released Renewal. This was an album that really upset a lot of people, that were fans of the band because it was such a change in style. Cause for Conflict, it's a little more progressive, but still kind of felt more like a logical move from, Coma of Souls and the albums that came before. It's got its detractors, but it's got a lot of people now, I think, that really view it as one of the good albums of this period of time. But then Outcast came out, and then Endorama, and they're so vastly different. And for me, especially with, the multitude of bands that you see go in a different direction and you don't like what they're putting out, it was really nice for 2001 to roll around and for Violent Revolution to come out. So I'm sure you've got some notes on that if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So Kreator in 2001, when this album was released, consisted of Mile Petroza, Petroza, on vocals and guitars. He is basically the main guy. Then it was Christian Geisler Geisler on bass, Venters still on drums, and then they added a Finnish guitar player named Sammy. I am not even going to try to pronounce his last name, as the lead guitar player. And if you ask me, this guy changed the game for Kreator. And we'll get more into him as we talk about the album. But to me, he has, and even though Petroza is credited with writing all the songs and all the music and the lyrics, Sammy has had a major influence and has probably had a lot to do with a lot of the way things are done in the studio and how these songs are put together.
100%. I mean, even if a band has one core writer of the music, the other members have their part in the sound and the not the writing, but the instrumentation, everything like
arranging.
That. Yeah, arranging specifically. So, yeah, he has a huge difference in it, and we're definitely going to talk about that as we go.
Right. Now, Violent Revolution was released on September 5th, 2001 on Steamhammer SPV Records worldwide. It was produced by our friend Andy Sneap, and I say our friend because we talk a lot about him and some of the
love-hate with Andy Sneap.
The love-hate that we have with Andy Sneap. It was recorded at Area 51 Studios in Hollywood, Florida, and Backstage Studios in Derbyshire, United Kingdom. That is Andy's personal studio, and that's where he does a lot of guitar tracking, guitar soloing at his place. Like I said, all the music and the lyrics were written by Petroza. This is the first album to feature Sammy on guitar. Like I said, it was very noticeable. So he definitely did something. The way I put it is that the songs seem more mature and it is a lot more melodic. So let's get into it. Let us talk about it.
All right. So track one is Reconquering the Throne. So this has multiple meanings, obviously. It's got a tongue-in-cheek recognition that this is a return to classic form, as well as recognizing that those around you don't always have your best interests in mind. So that could be in reference to maybe people in the industry telling them to go in a different direction than what's comfortable. It could be any number of things, but it seems pointed. I'm just not 100% sure who at. So the solo and the harmony are more melodic than ever, and I absolutely love it.
So this has got a great main riff, and so the song is broken up into 3 riffs, if you want to look at it that way. There's the verse riff, the chorus riff, and the bridge solo riff. It is definitively 3 different riffs, and they repeat for their distinctive parts. At least that's what I can tell. But melodic, I mean, it was instantaneous that I could tell that there was a melodic aspect to this song, to this album. As soon as I put this on, I'm like, oh, okay. So this guy Sammy definitely, they brought in that Finnish sound, that region of the world has a particular style, and he is definitely bringing it to the table.
Yeah, I liken it to a lot of what was going on with the Gothenburg bands at the time. So it adds that element into it while still maintaining kind of the sound of the region, being a German band or just a European metal band at the time. So track 2, The Patriarch. And so there's not much to say here. It serves as a melodic intro into the title track, but I really like it. It reminds me, like I said, of what's kind of going on with the Gothenburg bands, but just melody. I mean, that's the best way to put it, melody.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interlude that comes in before Violent Revolution. They could have easily have made this part of Violent Revolution. I don't see why they didn't. But if you just want to skip it, then you're allowed to skip it.
I mean, it works perfectly either way because you can just go like punch right into the song. I mean, how many times have we complained about these long intros before the song really takes off?
Well, it's funny because I said ask Iron Maiden how to add 1 to 2 minutes to a song that never really materializes anyplace else in the song. So that is exactly what we're talking about here. Where, like, for instance, at the beginning of on the Final Frontier, you got 4 minutes of some intro shit. Why didn't they cut that track in half? If you want the first 4 minutes, leave it there, but make it a separate track. You already have a separate title for it. Why do I have to listen to 4 minutes before I get to the song that I like? On the track, it's 8 minutes long. But on En Vivo, they made it 2 separate tracks. See, go figure.
Well,
anyway.
Steve didn't want you to skip it. So he wanted you to hear all of it every time. Every time.
I fixed that.
All right, so let's go into the title track, Violent Revolution. The title track starts off with a killer riff. I mean, it's an angry, bitter track and a headbanger. The nature of humanity and the cycle of hate that repeats, just destroying everything that's good and pure. And now there's moments of it in the lyrics that you can glean that there's always that sense of hope, just like with adults and children, right? Like adults become more jaded and broken as time goes on, but children are innocent and they have that willingness to kind of continue on, and that's the only thing that really keeps humanity together is that glimmer of hope that children bring sometimes. So it's a sad reality, but it's an awesome track. It's slower, heavier, the sound that carries over from like what they built upon with Coma of Souls. So even though this is 11 years later, it feels like it comes right after Coma of Souls. But now there's those, like we said, those melodic elements that just are added to the formula and they really flesh out the song. But this is a really catchy track. It's really good.
Yeah, I think this is a great song. It to me, it's probably at this point. I mean, let's skip all the experimental songs. For all their heavier stuff, I guess you could say, this is one of their more accessible songs. It's got a catchy chorus, if I dare say so myself. There's definitely, we talk about it, there's always one song in an album that you pay a lot of attention to, not you as a listener, but they and,
as the songwriters,
as the producing team, or the production team, all that. They, you pay specific attention to one song because it's good. This is that one song on the album. Harmony solos, little licks in the verses after the solo, harmony solo to end the song. I mean, there's just a lot of little things in this song that make it that much better of a track. So, it's a pretty cool track. There's
a reason why it's the title track, I would say. Like you said, they pay a bit more attention to it and make sure it's that recognizable song. So, track 4 is All of the Same Blood, Unity. So this is a great track, kind of questioning how humanity can justify killing its own people. Small differences between cultures can make us hate each other, and acts like the Holocaust can be the result. Then after all the dust settles, the pawns who fell into serving and believing in a dictator can be left abandoned after they fail, questioning why they did what they did. It's a dark subject. You can see the depth of the writing in these tracks. I mean, there's so much thought put into what he writes. And what's funny is in some of the live recordings, there's these interludes between songs, and you hear him say, some people think it's still cool to be racist, and I'm just like, it's funny hearing this, like, like it just feels like so different than what you would expect, because
right.
The songs sound so angry, but they're really preaching about acceptance, and it's so funny. So
there's something I noticed about the words, like not just the words, but even the song titles and stuff like that. And then when you start listening to the song, like even on the more newer stuff, it's like there's a theme to me that is, it's kind of, there's an uplifting theme to a lot of this stuff, even though a lot of this stuff is dark and gloomy and moody, but there almost seems to me to be an uplifting theme throughout all the songs, especially in the latter tracks, or the latter albums, that just kind of like, it's so weird to me. Like, you could write such a heavy, dark song, but when you really get down to it, there's a positive message coming out of it.
There's always that glimmer of hope, like I said,
right?
Like with the last track, that the moment, or the, I guess I'm technically talking about this track. There's always that, like, there's something that still keeps us together, even though there are these dark moments, and we can hate each other over subjects that we don't, that really shouldn't. That we're being manipulated by powers above us, etc., and we're all really not that different. And it's interesting to hear that from a band like this, that you think like it's this dark imagery and this and that, but it's really preaching kindness and love and stuff. It's so funny, but
yeah, exactly.
So, but more on the technical aspects, like the harmonies, the melodic sections add some real warmth to the song. There's the emotion that goes with it, because, like I said, we're talking about hating each other for things that we shouldn't. And this song specifically is about the things that happened in World War II, and the emotion that goes along, especially like with the solo, that just really fit, and when you're listening to the lyrics and really absorbing it, it just adds so much depth to it. And so there's this outro also that has this kind of repeating echo to it that it caps it off so well because it's very introspective in tone. And so when you're really getting the whole message, like, it's just such a good song.
Yeah, it is. And coming off of Violent Revolution, it picks up the pace. But there's some definitely some the breakdown portion of the song. It has harmony guitar parts. That is different. The songwriting has definitely changed, and there's a ton of influence that Sammy has given to Millet. That's really interesting to see it basically fleshed out in these songs. So I like it. I think it's a great song.
All right, so that takes us into track 5, Servant in Heaven, King in Hell. So again, there's so many layers to these lyrics here. I mean, there are people that fight and struggle and take what they can to rise above, while others will just follow and never question beyond what they're told. I mean, like I said, it applies to multiple subjects. Like, you can take it at face value, and somebody that's a servant of God, or a follower of more sadistic tones, and you can rise above if you do things that you would not necessarily view as moral, but when sometimes you're so strictly moral, you feel like you're falling behind. So there's these multiple layers to this song that you can really gather what you want to from it. Struggling to rise above can feel like you're in hell, or there's the complacency that everything can feel easy, but it's not ever going to make you rise above. You're already at a certain place, right? And you're stuck there. But these dynamic riffs and harmonies, they just add so much to it, but it's just really heavy and aggressive. So it's a song you can just bang your head to. And listen to it, gather what you want to from it, glean what you want to learn from it. But I think it's one of those that's open to interpretation in a lot of regard.
Yeah, what I like about this song is, it's not a quick song, and it's more of a mid-paced track. I can't describe it as a chugger, but it's very methodical in its pacing. Harmonies all over the place, which is great. There's the part towards the intro where there's, the guitars are harmonizing off the same bass riff. So that's pretty interesting. That is cool. Yeah. The solo is very cool. This is well thought out. What I like about it is that it's not a million notes. It's just one that follows the melody of the song. And I think that's cool. When I did a demo track for a band one time, and I think I mentioned it a long time ago, where the guitar player didn't want to do what I asked, and I just asked him to do one thing, and he did it, and the band liked it, and he couldn't stand it, and basically trashed everything. We ended up recording over it, and it was one of those. I asked him to do the solo. I said, you got. For what it was worth, you got 8 bars to a solo. The first 4 bars, do something that follows the melody of the song. And then as soon as you hit at the end of the 4th bar, go straight into shredding. And all he wanted to do was shred for 8 bars. I'm like, just try it. He did it. And the band looked at me. I think I was at the time, I was... we had the drummer and the bass player were hanging out with me in the studio, and he was just, I think the singer was off doing something else, but this guitar player was doing his thing, and the bass player and the drummer looked at me like, dude, that's so cool. He came in, listened to it, didn't like it. And it's like, come on. This is a perfect example in a song like this where that works. When you put a solo, you don't need to have a million notes to make it meaningful and really good, deep solo. Something that follows the melody of the song, something that harmonizes off of something like that, works really well. I think it works great on this song. So this is a pretty neat track. I like this track a lot.
Same. So track 6 is Second Awakening. So Second Awakening is about learning and rising above the past, learning from and not letting you repeat the same mistakes. So again, Sammy's guitar work, having replaced Frank, they had some good chemistry. I really love those early albums that are very thrashy, but this is just so refreshing. Like I mentioned, the melodic aspects again are so welcome. What I love about this track is it really does feel like an evolution from the material on Coma of Souls. Like it feels like a song that could have been written for that album, but with the addition of the melodic tracks specifically, or melodic aspects specifically, it just feels like that evolution, even though, the last album of this vein was 11 years ago. This is one that I feel like specifically just rolls over perfectly from that time period.
No, I can see that. I could definitely see that. When with a song like this is, it's mid-paced riff with a guitar and drum pattern, intro that leads to a guitar solo. 45 seconds into the song, the main riff starts, and it's the same riff as the intro, but it's faster. It's kind of, odd to say something.
You said faster?
It's played a certain way.
Huh? You said faster?
Yeah.
Where are those dreams that I've been after?
You fucked me up on that one. So, I was like, where are you going with this? So the chorus is basically the intro section with lyrics, and then you get the solo that's played over the main melody and harmonizes with it to some extent. So there's a lot of cool things with this song, and that again, that's Sammy's influence on the songwriting. So you can't help but think, where were you all these years, Sammy? So, but yeah, it's a very cool and interesting track. So I like this one as well.
All right, that leads us into track 7, Ghetto War. So this is kind of where the album goes into kind of a different direction to some degree. Like it still follows that same idea, that like the darkness of humanity, etc. But this is more of like a dystopian future, and that kind of carries over for a couple tracks here. So not necessarily directly relating to anything specific about societal problems, etc., but more of like the direction we could possibly go in. So again, like I said, another dystopian future, but the riff itself is it's very heavy, really great. It has the single most sludgy and yet melodic bluesy solo on the album. So you would think like that combination, like you're saying sludgy, bluesy, and melodic. It's like you go to a restaurant and they tell you they have a burger that's on a donut with peanut butter and jelly on it. Like you think, oh my God, that's disgusting. But then you try it and it's like, this works and I don't understand my taste buds now. And so like, that's what
that would never happen to me. Can't stand peanut butter.
I got you, but you get what I'm saying. Like,
no, I know what you're saying. Exactly,
there's those things that you go, this should not work, but it does. And
right.
It's a really good solo. I definitely would put this up there in one of the top solos on the album. But really cool track. Very kind of catchy, but what do you think about it?
It's definitely one that gets your head bopping.
Mm-hmm.
It's one that you all of a sudden you're listening to it and you realize you're shaking your head up and down. You're not head banging per se, but it's definitely getting you like up and down. It's different. It's definitely different than most everything else on the album. That's for sure. The solo section's slower. It's definitely more thought out. Again, it's one of those where you don't need to do a lot to say a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's something, and yes, Ghetto War, it's kind of, there is a sludginess to it for sure. But you know what? Again, going back to what we said about how the lyrics or the title track or the title of the song, let's say, match the music. Sludgy, bluesy, ghetto. Mm-hmm. Okay. Melodic, because that's just the way they are now because of Sammy. So yeah, it definitely matches. And then at the same time, it's different than anything else on the album at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us into track 8, Replicas of Life. When I first heard this opening, it kind of scared me. I remember listening to it, and I was like, "Oh no, is this track gonna be like the stuff from the previous albums?" It's not. It's not. It takes off like right away. You know, it just kicks in, rips your face off. The focus again is more on like a dystopian dark future. But it just brings some kind of levity to the album, I guess, because everything in the first half is so serious, and then these kind of more more focused on just telling a possible future, like dystopian kind of thing, more Mad Max-ish. They're not as focused and dark, I guess, so it lightens things up in the weirdest way.
Well, it's funny because, I thought the same thing you thought, is like, oh, well, now because they did these last 4 albums, they could do whatever the hell they want, and get away with it.
Yeah.
But even though they returned to their thrashiness, and they had, but see, it's funny, they returned to their thrashiness, but at the same time, they brought such a huge element with the melodicness of the stuff that Sammy's bringing along to this, that it's not just thrashy anymore.
Yeah.
It's so much more mature. But this one's odd because you sit there, the first thing you think of is, they're playing something off of, Endorama or something like that,
That's what it sounds like at the very beginning. It scared the
right,
crap
exactly.
out of me.
I mean, you got clean vocals, it's a clean guitar intro, but, it doesn't last very long. At a minute, the song really kicks in, and then you go, oh, okay, hey, so they are back.
It's not even bad. It's just like a whiplash kind of thing. You're like, no,
right.
no.
I mean, there's a PTSD vibe to it that, like, no.
When you're listening to it in 2001, that's the feeling that you get. So, all right. So that takes us into track 9, Slave Machinery. I mean, it's pretty to the point about the subject matter, manipulation of man into slavery and abuse. The main riff is pretty mechanical, and I feel like that's intentional to fit the concept of the song, the structure of the lyrics, but the solo takes really this more human and hopeful sound, and it's by far my favorite solo on the album.
Well, you're talking about machinery. Machinery has a rhythm to it.
Exactly.
And so it's got, the drum fill and some, double bass intro on the song. But also talking about machinery, it's, there's structure to it. There's a coldness to it, and that's part of this, same thing. But then, you got this chugging guitar, and then the song gets going, and, then there's a catchy melody to it because that's what they do now. So it's got all these little things mixed in here in this one song.
Absolutely. Did you like the solo? I'm just curious.
I don't remember it.
No.
I didn't get to, I mean, I heard it. I don't remember it, note for note or anything like that. I didn't put any notes on it, so I haven't listened to it probably in like 4, 5, 6 days now.
Well, that's your assignment, is after we finish this, listen to the solo on that album again and just kind of refresh yourself on it, because it is really good. It's so interesting, too, because it plays off of that mechanical kind of like, structured sound of the song, and then it just goes into this like more humane aspect of it. And I think it's just a really cool juxtaposition. So that takes us into track 10, Bittersweet Revenge. So this is one of those things, like when you're filled with hate and rage, and there's that line between love and hate. You admire someone, but you're also jealous of them, and then when that's all gone, there's that hole left inside. Like, it's been what's fueling you for so long. So what I find disappointing about this song, though, is that it like, if you really listen to the way it starts and the way the last track ended, there's this gap in between. I feel like it should just immediately jet into this song because they flow so well together. But that's just a minor complaint. I always wished that like I said, there was no break, but I think it's one of those really cool, especially after a subject matter like the slave machinery, a Bittersweet Revenge, I think is like, if you were in that situation, like where you're a slave and you have that not necessarily hatred, but like you despise your position and you're now free from it, where do you go? I mean, I think that's a real subject that a lot of people had over, generations all over the planet had to, really question. So I think those two songs really go hand in hand very well, actually.
Well, remember the scene, the few episodes in Game of Thrones. She freed all of them. And then what did they end up doing? Going back to work for the people that they were slave to.
I mean, that's based on reality, too, yeah.
Right.
In many situations.
And now, or not now, but in the way it was in Game of Thrones, they were working. At least they were working. They weren't slaves to them. But it's funny because, you're free. You can do whatever you want. Well, but this is all I know. And this is what I want to do. And it makes sense. So they go back to doing that. It's a weird, like you said before, you used the word juxtaposition. In this particular case, that is the odd juxtaposition. What do you do when you're free to do whatever you want? Mm-hmm. So that is pretty cool. For me, the track is, what sticks out the most for me is the melodic vocal lines. I think that's a really cool part of the song that really is attractive to me in that. So, and then, it's got the riff change from the pre-chorus to the chorus. That's a nice touch. So it's a cool track. I like it.
So that takes us into track 11, Mind on Fire. Opening your mind to something beyond the obvious. It has more of a hopeful tone and melody. And, I really like the riff. It's, softer moments that kind of like oppose the heavier elements of the segments of the song. Excuse me. It's, it can be viewed at base level as well, like, a drug that alters your mind, or it can be just opening your mind to something beyond what you normally see. So kind of a cool track towards the end. You're getting to be, I tend to think like 10 tracks is that sweet spot of where albums should be. 12 isn't too bad, but this isn't, I think, one of the stronger tracks on the album, but it's not bad.
So what was funny about this song for me is like, you hear it, it starts off with this riff, and he's just riffing and riffing and riffing, right? And it's like the band's sitting there watching him riff, like, oh, we should be playing with him. And then they all kind of jump in and start playing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're recording a song here. Oh, that seems pretty cool. Let's do something with him, That's the way it almost seemed at the beginning. It's like, he's just going off and playing. He's riffing. He's all by himself. And then the band's like, boom, we jump right in. But overall, I mean, it's got a cool vocal melody. I mean, it's got an interesting chorus. The song's got a nice little gallop to it, so it's not the worst song on the album. So it's not the best song on the album, but it's a good song. It's a decent song.
It's fine and fun. So.
And it's fine. It's fine, and it's placed in a good spot where you're towards the end, but let's do something slightly different.
Yes. All right, so that brings us to the closer of the album, System Decay. So it's one of those things that society, every major society in our existence, has eventually fallen or changed. It's had to. Issues like greed, complacency, conflict, lack of conflict. Complacency is bred out of lack of conflict, right? So all these things that lead to the system that is set in place that's supposed to protect the people can eventually fall apart, and then the people fall apart because of that. So, it's I would say it's not a bad closer. I think it's a pretty solid track overall, but again, you're 12 tracks in, so it can be a bit overlooked, but I think it's worth listening to. It's one of those that it wraps up the album with a nice little bow, and everything is kind of cleaned out, like finished out.
Yes, I agree. It's slightly prophetic, this kind of song, so that's it's an interesting thing to it. I do like the riffing and the drumming. I follow along with the guitars and all that stuff. The song is cool. It's a last song on the album, and it's a pretty interesting thing that unlike all the other bands that leave their fastest song for the end, They're not. Kreator doesn't do that. So that's the interesting thing about how they lay out their albums, which I think is pretty cool. But this is not a bad song, so it's a pretty interesting way to end the album.
All right, so thoughts on the album itself?
Well, for me, this album gives me the vibe that Kreator took everything that they learned throughout their entire career, especially in the last 10 years with all the experimentation, and they put it all together on this album. And this was definitely one of these we're back kind of albums, but not necessarily we're back to play the same old style that we played before we experimented. This is one of those things that we just took you on a 10-year journey through all this experimentation. Now we're going to play everything that we've learned over all this time, and we're going to give you the best version of Kreator we can give you. And they've done that since this point. And that's pretty cool. So it really reflects on this album. I think this album is really, really good. The addition of Sammy is huge. I mean, it's just gigantic and enormous. I mean, I don't know what other adjectives you could describe for something to be so big. And the fact that he's still there today doing the things that he does, it's incredible. I mean, it's an enormous role that he plays in the band, even though technically he doesn't get much credit for it. But yeah, this is one of those things where it's, if you know now, if you knew then what you know now, you could say, yes, this is absolutely the start of something. But nobody knew that at the time. They just knew that they were back. So I think it's a great album.
Yeah, I mean it's an evolution for sure, and it's really reflective of the direction that they've gone ever since. The newer albums have only kind of continued this pattern, and I would say oftentimes really grown upon what it is. I do think of this as a benchmark album for them. So I think a lot of people might think of this as, their best album, which I would not necessarily disagree with. There's some people think of the early days, certain specific albums within that time period also as their best albums. But I have a hard time disagreeing with anybody that would think that this is their best album. So, what do you think as far as which one's the better album?
So when you put the two albums together, there's two differences that stand out really far for me. Coma of Souls, like we talked about, seems to me to be, when you put everything together, the culmination of everything they had done up to that point, which obviously sounds stupid when you listen to it. Yeah, it's the culmination. Yeah, that's the end of that, everything up to that point. But you could see every album was building up to this grandly good album that Coma of Souls is. The unfortunate part about it is that they never followed up Coma of Souls with a proper follow-up. So is that the type of thing where you sit there and you say to yourself, as Millet may have said to himself, I can't do any better at this point. I need to do something different. Okay, so it's that kind of thing. Coma of Souls is the pinnacle of where they were at that time. So they do this experimentation, and then they come back and they say, okay, well, we learned a ton of stuff. I now have this great new guitar player. Look how good we are. And they put out this fabulous album when it comes to Violent Revolution. So it's even though you and I, the reason why we chose these two albums is because it was the end of one thrash period and the beginning of another thrash period, if you want to look at it like that. I wouldn't even put it in those terms with thrash because it's hard to describe what they do now as thrash, because it's so beyond, like Ventor. It's very similar to the guy who plays drums for Saxon. Where do these guys get off being the drummer of a band for all these years and they're playing better now than they did when they first started with the band? I don't get that. This guy Venture, he's fucking amazing. You know, I mean,
It really is. Yeah.
I mean, as he was playing legitimate thrash style drumming that was a combination of true thrash drumming mixed in with blast beats and stuff like that. It was the extreme style of drumming. To now he's playing. He's almost sounds equivalent to any of the melodic death metal drummers that are coming out of Norway, Sweden, and Finland and all that shit up in the Nordic area. I mean, it's just crazy to think about that, you know, that this guy at this age, because he's not a young chicken anymore. We know that, to be still doing it at that high level. That's amazing. So to answer the question, I'm going to give it to Violent Revolution because it's just so far and above better than anything that they had done up to that point.
I'm going to agree with you. This is, for me, it's tough because I really, really like Phantom Antichrist. But this is probably still at this point my favorite album from Kreator. I mean, it's so good from beginning to end. There's only a couple moments where I say, maybe you could cut this a little shorter, but I don't even know what song I would pick to cut from the album. That's the thing. Like, I think the 12 tracks works really well. But if it was 10, it would be even tighter. But at the same time, like I said, I don't know what I would cut.
No, you don't cut anything. You just listen to them.
Hell yeah.
All right, well, that decides it. So both you and I have chosen Violent Revolution. So that doesn't mean that Coma of Souls is bad. Obviously, it's a very good album.
Not at all.
So, but
yeah,
but for us, it was Violent Revolution. So that brings us to our big four Kreator songs. And so this one was definitely hard for me because since I don't know most of their catalog, I literally had to flip through songs as fast as I possibly could to get through almost all the shit that they've played over their career. Unfortunately, there's stuff that I'm absolutely positive that I skipped. But for me, there's also that part of it that is I have to have that hook. I've always talked about it from the beginning to now. Songs have to have the hook to me. So I'm going to go first on this one only because I know you probably are interested in what I have to say. So
no, it's fine. Go ahead.
All right, so number 4 for me is "Hail to the Hordes" from the Gods of Violence album. Cool riff. I like the vocal melody and the chorus. What this song reminds me of is there's something about the Vikings that oozes from this song. And I might be wrong. I might be dead on. But because I didn't do enough depth and research on it, I just listened to it. I'm like, hey, this is a pretty cool song. I'm getting this vibe out of it. So that's my number 4 song. Number 3, Mental Slavery from Coma of Souls. After an hour of listening to that album, or almost an hour, I mean, this is one of, like I said, you finally get to take your foot off the gas pedal. You go into cruise control. This song is definitely cruise control, and I like it that much. So this is where Kenneth Dean goes off the deep end here with number 2. I'm going to pick Golden Age from Endorama. So I'm listening to, so when you and I first started talking about this, I was playing songs from the album that came right after Coma of Souls. And I'm like, what the hell is this? You know, I couldn't understand what was going on. I went from this really extreme, aggressive vocal pattern to this guy that was just kind of like singing and not necessarily sounding great, you know? And so you progress through the next few albums, and it's kind of like, it's not necessarily alternative metal, like sort of like what Metallica did with Load and Reload. They just stayed heavy metal. They just weren't the same extreme metal band they were. But Endorama, this song Golden Age is pretty cool for me. What this song reminds me of is Symphony of Destruction from Megadeth. I don't know if you got that vibe or not when you listen to it, but that's what I got. So it's a catchy chorus. I like it. That's my number 2. My number 1 song, we just talked about it a few minutes ago, Violent Revolution. off the Violent Revolution album. It's got a tinge of melodic death metal to it. The chorus makes for a nice audience participation, so I think this is a really cool song. It is my favorite Kreator song up to this point. When I learn more about them, it might change.
Well, I would never tell you that your list is wrong, but it's wrong. No, I'm kidding. But it is wrong.
That's twice you told me I'm wrong, and you just said you were never going to tell me I was wrong.
That's true. No, it's if you like those particular tracks off of Endorama, that's all fine and good. But you basically just said Risk is a great album.
No, I'm sorry. I did not say that.
So I'm just kidding, of course. Well, let's go over my list.
I said Saint Anger was a great album.
Oof. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go on my list now. Track 4. So my number 4 is Terror Zone off of Coma of Souls. I really like that track. It's always one that stuck with me. When I got around to getting Coma of Souls, I just thought that was such a killer album at the time. For the longest time, that was my favorite album from Kreator. Then when Violent Revolution came out, this just blew me away. But Terror Zone was probably my favorite track from that band for a long time. But that tells you how much more awesome stuff they've put out since. So my number 3 is Hordes of Chaos, Necrolog for the Elite off of Hordes of Chaos. This was another one where very catchy, very cool track. This one you can sing along and do the audience participation kind of thing with as well. My number 2 is Your Heaven, My Hell off of Phantom Antichrist. That song for like 5 years was my lead off track at the gym whenever I would go run on the treadmill. That was it because I would always start off with a walk, and then when the song kicks in about a minute and a half through, that gives you enough of the warm up to just kick into your run. And for the longest time, that's how I started my run. So awesome track. I love that album. I'd love to do something more with it at some point when we have another extreme metal or another Kreator episode. We'll see when we get around to that someday. And then my number 1 was actually your number 1, Violent Revolution. This song has just kicked ass for so many years. It's still, since 2001, my favorite Kreator song, and it still sticks with me. This is why I consider it my favorite album too, is because that longevity, the quality of the songs on this album. Even though I really love Phantom Antichrist, like I said, I think just that little bit tips it over. So Violent Revolution, my number 1.
Cool. I really wish, yes, we had plenty of time to do stuff, but my daily routine consists of so many different things that take me away from listening to music that, the most opportune time is when I'm in my car. And even then, that's cut short a lot of times by having a conversation with my wife, which is, I have nothing against that. I need to talk to her most of the time. But it's one of those things where I don't have a tremendous amount of opportunity to be able to sit by myself and listen to music.
Well, part of this is also getting to know these bands. But way back when we did our first Queensryche album, I'm sure I've grown to like certain songs better than maybe what I picked as my first or my favorite tracks at the time. And we can always readdress these later. But the right. fact that, we're getting this opportunity to really find a new band and like a new band, I think is great. So I like your list other than one pick.
And it's funny because if you listen to the song, when was the last time you heard Golden Age?
Probably 5-6 years ago when I listened to their entire catalog just on a whim.
Right. So if you listen to it like that, the part of the verse sounds so much like Symphony of Destruction. And it's just the riffing. It's just like Okay.
It's probably one of the better tracks in the album. I typically like the lead-off songs on a lot of their albums.
I didn't like the next couple of songs after that. It was just this one that kind of stuck out for me. But anyhow, no, it's definitely one of these where I'm now going to listen. I mean, I actually picked out a bunch of songs. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, and I put them all on my 3,000 song playlist. So I keep adding to that.
This is a band I would like to maybe someday do a worst to first. So, listeners out there, if you're interested to hear a worst to first on Kreator, definitely write in. Let us know.
Okay, I'm sure Christoph will say yes. All right, well, that is our big 4 Kreator songs, and that concludes today's episode of Debating Metal. If you liked what you heard today, remember to subscribe or like the show on whichever platform you choose to listen to us on, and you'll get a new episode from us just about every week or so.
And don't forget to leave us a comment on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or leave us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post a new episode. So remember to tune in to next week as we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.